Last week, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a report containing some 260 recommendations to improve the dire human rights situation in North Korea. To this, North Korea has said it would review about half of those recommendations. Today, we go in depth on the implications of Pyongyang's response and furthermore on the current human rights situation in the reclusive state with Signe Poulsen, a Korea representative for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Could you first of all give us a further explanation on this Universal Periodic Report on North Korea's human rights situation adopted last week?
Yeah, so the Universal Periodic Review is a peer review that every country, each of the 193 member states of the United Nations, go through every four and a half years or so. And it's very much intended as a constructive review amongst member states, where each member states have opportunities to give recommendations to other member states. And the receiving member states, in this case North Korea, then looks at all of these recommendations, 262 in this case coming from different member states, and makes a decision on which ones it can accept and which ones it can't accept for the time being. The reviews are usually based on a couple of different documents. First of all, a report that's written by the member state under review itself, but also information from the United Nations about the human rights situation, as well as information by civil society organizations.
Now, I understand this is the third periodic report on North Korea's human rights situation, following the ones in 2009 and 2014, if I'm right.
That's correct.
Now, following this year's report, North Korea has expressed willingness to review about half of those recommendations made. Did it come as a surprise to you? How did North Korea respond to the two previous reports?
So in the case of the second Universal Periodic Review and that report, North Korea actually did accept a number of recommendations. So this year's review we see very much as a continuation of that, and actually as a positive trend in terms of North Koreans' increasing engagement with international human rights mechanisms. We see a number of recommendations that were accepted in the second cycle in 2014 that have actually been implemented in the period between this and the current and the previous review. So including, for example, the ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and certain steps taken to improve the rights of persons with disabilities, as well as a number of others. So in that sense, it wasn't a complete surprise. But on the other hand, we're of course happy or pleased when North Korea decides to accept a broader range of recommendations on various topics.
So North Korea has made some positive responses in the past, in the previous reports, and it has also made actual implementations on the recommendations.
It has made implementations, especially when it comes to areas such as ratifying or acceding to human rights treaties.
It's good to find out.
That is good.
Some progress has been made.
Yeah. What we really would like to see, though, in addition to the ratification, is implementation and improvement for your ordinary North Korean citizen living outside. Yeah.
Now, what's also notable is that North Korea has said it will review whether to accept UN's recommendation on the cooperation for the reunion of war-torn families. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time North Korea has ever accepted that it will cooperate for the reunion of the war-torn families. What are the implications to this?
So this issue of separated families and reunion is one, of course, that's of great concern as a human rights issue to the United Nations, and most of all to the families involved. Many of the relatives, as we all know very well, are elderly and time is running out. Right. And it was also included in the Panmunjom declaration made earlier this year, last year. And so we see this as a positive step, and we very much hope that steps will be taken to implement it. And it's true, a number of member states made that recommendation to North Korea. So we very much hope to see progress in this area.
Now, just to give our viewers a rough idea of who the member states are, just on top of your head, could you name some of the member states that gave the recommendations this year?
There were about 87 of them. So, and they range from all over the globe, whether it's Africa or South America or Europe.
All across the continents.
Yeah, all across the continents. And that's one of the things we see as positive. Indeed, North Korea has also engaged on the other side of the process where it has given recommendations to member states. So it's really a two-way process in that sense.
I see. Now, North Korea, however, has rejected the other about 130 recommendations that call for North Korea's fair trial and efforts to resolve the issues of abductees and war prisoners. How do you see that?
Of course, we always hope that serious human rights issues such as those would be accepted by countries, including North Korea. There are some other recommendations that North Korea chose not to accept, including on giving full access to the UN human rights monitors, for example, and also the special rapporteur on the human rights situation in North Korea, and on political prisons. So while we hope for progress in those areas where North Korea has agreed to the recommendations, there are also some very serious recommendations where we still need to see some progress. North Korea itself has stated that it hasn't accepted these recommendations because they don't reflect the reality on the ground and because they are politically motivated. That's the reason they've given, but they are very serious human rights recommendations, so we would like to see more progress on them.
And North Korea's dire human rights situation became the UN's official agenda some 16 years ago. Now, we all know that the Hermit Kingdom still remains the world's most secluded state. But according to recent UN findings, how is the current situation of human rights in North Korea?
So my office, or the office I work in, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, opened our presence looking at North Korea in 2015 here in Seoul. And we've been, since that time, monitoring North Korea much more closely than in the past. We've been conducting interviews with escapees who've come from North Korea and also collected other types of information. Based on the information we have, the situation of human rights remains very serious. In particular, we have quite a lot of information indicating very serious human rights violations in the context of the prison system and detention facilities in North Korea, where conditions are very dire. But also more broadly, areas such as economic rights, the right to education, the right to adequate food and a good standard of living. So there's a range of human rights concerns that we have. Of course, also political freedoms like right to information or to access information from outside the country or to form organizations that may be giving alternative views to that of the government. So all of those kinds of situations also remain quite difficult.
You've mentioned that the scope of the fields the fields that need human rights improvement is very broad. But in your perspective, what would you say is the most urgent priority in terms of North Korea's human rights issues?
Yeah, in my perspective, it's a very difficult question. Of course, if you're a child who's hungry, the most urgent thing is the right to food. If you're a woman being subjected to ill treatment in a detention cell, it's probably the abolition of torture. So we have a range of urgent issues, and one thing we always emphasize is that there are links between these different human rights. If you fulfill the right to education, then people can have a voice, and people are more likely to be able to go out and be able to influence their government, for example. If you abolish discrimination, which we also think is a big issue that needs to be addressed, then everyone is on an equal footing. And then we move towards also the sustainable development goals that the whole UN system and indeed all countries in the world are working towards now, where we are really seeking to reach those that are furthest left behind and move forward with a view to really focusing on improving the lives of those left furthest behind. So I think what's important is to look at the whole range of these violations together.
So it's important that we have a comprehensive view when looking at North Korea's human rights situations, because they are in one way or other linked to each other.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, we have to admit that there are limits to forcing North Korea to follow UNHCR's recommendations. What other ways are there to help improve North Korea's dire human rights situation?
Yeah, as with other countries, there are a range of things that can be done. One of the things we do is as I mentioned earlier, is collecting information and ensuring that we have a good record of what's happening and base our work on that record. But things like human rights education and training programs for officials, so they understand what can be done in terms of implementing human rights, can be very effective and important. Things such as holding people accountable in whatever ways through whatever methods is possible and politically feasible at a certain and given time. Working with countries hand in hand on aid programs where you can improve, again, the lives of those who most need it, whether it's on access to education or rights of disabilities or access to medication and the right to food, which humanitarian agencies are involved in, is also very important. So again, addressing that holistic picture of what's happening and trying to help in that way. And of course, also giving North Korean people a voice and allowing them to talk about how they would like to see their future is incredibly important in all of this.
So, of course, we need collective efforts from the international community. But South Korea, do you expect some bigger role from South Korea as a nation that is right below North Korea?
I think it's very clear that there is a very special bond between South Korea and North Korea. While the two countries have been separated for many decades now, you still have familial ties, you have a language bond, and
we share the same root.
Share the same root. I think it's very important to recognize that those ties are important and cannot be dismissed. At the same time, it's also important for the whole international community to get behind this and try to help improve the situation of the people of North Korea. So there's two layers to this. I think South Korea definitely has a role, and the international community also has a role in supporting that this moves forward.
All right, that is all the time we have for you. Thank you so much, Ms. Poulsen, for your perspectives tonight. Your and the UN body's efforts as a whole is much appreciated here in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much.